My name is Andrew Bush, and I'm the director of the Bethlehem Institute of Peace and Justice here at Bethlehem Bible College. And we want to welcome you to Global Peacemakers Speak. In this series, our goal is to listen to important peacemakers, both here in Palestine and Israel, as well as the international community. And we are really pleased today to have with us Reverend Edwin Arrison, who's an important peacemaker in South Africa. Reverend Arrison worked closely with Archbishop Desmond Tutu from the mid-1980s until his death in 2021. And from 2020 to 2022, he served as the development manager of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. Currently, he's the director of the Volmut Youth Leadership Training Program. Together with Reverend Frank Chikane, who's one of the lecturers here in our Peace Institute, he's on the steering committee of the South African Palestine Anti-Apartheid Committee, which is going to be formally launched in Pretoria in early 2024, and we want to hear about that. But we welcome you, Reverend Arrison.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the great work that you all do here.
Well, it's an honor for us to be able to have these few minutes with you. And because of your close work with Archbishop Tutu, especially during apartheid, in the fall of apartheid, I thought we could discuss that subject some. And for some of our younger listeners and viewers who may not really be familiar with apartheid, I wondered if you could just explain where did the word apartheid come from? What does it mean? And what were the practical sort of manifestations of that in South Africa? I know that's a big question, but we want to hear.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, apartheid, or you would say apartheid, you can hear from the word it's about being apart, keeping people apart. And so it's a sort of Dutch Afrikaans word, apartheid. That was really the philosophy of the National Party government, and they came into power in South Africa in 1948, which is very interesting because it has similarities with the dates here. They came into power after the World War. So what happened was that the British really were in power. And because they went to war, the Afrikaners or Dutch people could organize locally, politically. And so they came to power in 1948. And then what they did was set up this legal system of apartheid. And so apartheid was legal, in case anyone doesn't know that. That was the legal framework. And it was contained in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which interestingly started with the words, "in humble submission to Almighty God." Oh. So you can already see the theological underpinning of the system of apartheid. And of course, they wrote laws that then tried to govern the way people lived in South Africa. I mean, the most important of that was that there was really sort of a grand apartheid, and then there was petty apartheid. And so it's important that one distinguishes between these two things, because under grand apartheid, 87% of the land belonged to 13% of the people, and 13% of the land belonged to 87% of the people, and that's of course racialized. So the 13% of the people were the white people in South Africa, English and Dutch origin white people, and the 87% of the people were all those who were not white. In other words, black. And under apartheid there were four categories. You were either white, or you were black, or black African, or you were colored. So that's a kind of a mixture of white and black and various other people. And the fourth category was Indian. So mainly people came as slaves from India to work in the sugarcane fields on the east coast of South Africa. And the whole idea was to keep these people apart and make sure that those who are white dominate everything and control everything. Now, they tried to become a bit sophisticated by, for example, creating black homelands, what we call Bantustans. And so each of the homelands would be controlled by some group that they control from Pretoria. Mm-hmm. And so there was two homelands for the Xhosa people, Transkei and Ciskei. There was a homeland, this was never fully proclaimed, but there was a homeland for the Zulu people, Zululand. And then there was this very interesting homeland for the Tswana people called Boputa Tswana. And for the context of Palestine and Israel, it would be interesting to see how Boputa Tswana looked, because it was little pieces of land that were disconnected from each other. That was really one country called Boputa Tswana, and they had their own president, Lucas Mangophi at the time. And so on and so forth. So you had this engineered system of keeping people apart, but the 13% of the people owned 87% of the land, meaning they owned all the gold mines, all the diamond mines, all the platinum mines, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. They owned all the companies, and the rest of us were just, our family and our parents were just the laborers, really. And that was the idea. There was an education system. By the time we got our liberation, we had 14 education departments that had to be merged into one. And the whole idea with the education system was that black people should know their place. They should know that they will never be the owners of the economy. They will always be the ones tilling the land. That's their job. They will be in the factories and so on. And then, of course, they tried to divide us by saying to colored people, oh, you're a little bit more important. You're not quite welcome in the bedroom, but you're welcome in the kitchen. While the black person must stand outside. And so they tried that division, but I think under someone like Steve Biko, who was a big name, yes. We had something called the Black Consciousness Movement in the 70s in particular.
I remember Steve Biko.
Yes. And Steve was the one who really helped to unite us. And of course, it was people like Desmond Tutu and Bayers Naudé, Frank Chikane and others who were the main drivers of that unity amongst black people in particular, but unity amongst the people of South Africa that was driven by these theologians who could see that the system of apartheid was not simply a political system, it was a theological system. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to counter that theological system by saying, this is not of God. All human beings are equal, and all human beings have been created in the image of God. And that was a very simple message we could put out there. And eventually, that whole system fell.
Mm. What was petty apartheid?
Petty apartheid was really the kind of things that some people today, they kind of focus on that. But it was about certain benches in the city. There were signs that said whites only could sit on those benches. Mm. And the others, they wouldn't say blacks, they would say non-whites only. So you, as a black person, you were the negative of white. Uh-huh. You were not black, you were non-white. And also the beaches. I mean, as a child, I could not go play on certain beaches. Those beautiful white sandy beaches, I could not play there. Our beach was very rocky, but we had to play, over there. And there were often policemen standing, keeping us away from these beautiful beaches. Mm. And then what we started doing, particularly during the 80s, we started defying these laws. We started saying, well, sorry, we will go to these beaches. And actually, Bishop Tutu was arrested on one of these protests, where he said, today we will take over the beaches. And this was during apartheid. So the system gradually came to an end. We could see it coming to an end in the 80s. But we had to make it come to an end. Mm. And it was really from the bottom up. The people had to become organized in order to overcome the system.
It's ironic that apartheid really was imposed after World War II, because after World War II, many of the colonial governments in Africa ended, and there was just a vast nationalistic movement, and nations became independent of their colonial overseers. But yet in South Africa, sort of the opposite happened.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
We had a special colonialism. It was internal colonialism, and so it was really the groups from two different European nations, the British and the Dutch, who were trying to establish their control over the people of South Africa. But now they began to say, this is our land. We're not going back to the Netherlands, whatever. So we're establishing ourselves. But remember, this is why I say it's important to have the theological conversation. They started saying that God is on their side, that God gave them this land. There was a day in December the 16th, was called the Day of the Vow. And they actually said that this is the day when God helped them to defeat the Zulu people. And they actually prayed, they said, God, please help us to overcome these people. And then if we do overcome, we will know that you gave us this land. And so, of course, with more firepower and so on, they defeated the Zulus I can't remember the exact year, but it was on the 16th of December. And so that became the Day of the Vow, the Day of the Covenant. And they celebrated the fact that God gave them this land. And we said to them, we think you've got a misconception of who God is. We think you're reading the Bible in a way that is that simply is justifying or justifies what you are. So it's an ideology. It's not a theology. You're justifying an ideology, but you're looking at certain texts. And so they found those texts. Like you can do it with any debate. You can find certain biblical texts, and then they built up a system. But what they did not realize was that there were, let's call them, other texts or deeper texts that really show the fundamental nature of who God is. And it was, again, people like Tutu, Busak, Chikani, Albert Nolan, Beyers Naudé. These were the theologians who could pull their whole system apart and expose apartheid for what it is. And actually, they had a campaign called Standing for the Truth. And so the truth always wins, actually. And it doesn't matter how long it takes. We sometimes doubt that, but actually, we shouldn't put our own timeline onto God.
Yes.
As long as we know that the truth will always win.
Yes. Were there white Christian churches that spoke up on your behalf in South Africa?
Yes, and sadly not as denomination. That was individual white Christians. And so I mentioned the name of Beyers Naudé, for example. Beyers Naudé was someone who, he would have become the Prime Minister of apartheid South Africa and the moderator of the Dutch Reformed Church. And he had a complete turnaround. There's a long backstory to this. But his wife that he met, she was a Moravian, actually. And it was at the first mission station of the Moravians where he saw white and black Christians worshiping together. And so he had his own Damascus moment then.
Oh, fantastic.
Absolutely. And his mother did not want him to marry this Moravian woman, but he married her. And he, as a very senior member of the Dutch Reformed Church, one Sunday he dramatically went into his congregation, he took off his robe, and he left it there in front, and they both, as a couple, they walked out of this congregation. They said, "I'm turning my back on apartheid today."
Oh, powerful.
That was powerful. Oh, and that was before Bishop Tutu and others even came onto the scene. This was Beyers Naudé in the 1950s and 60s. Who took a stand against apartheid.
Internationally, where did governments come down on this? Were there governments that were hindering the process of bringing apartheid to an end?
Yes, unfortunately, and again, we must learn this lesson even today, that if we're going to depend on governments to bring down any evil system, it's not going to happen. It's always the people, and perhaps I must add, always the young people first. The young people are always in leadership in so many ways. We had this unfortunate troika leaders in the mid-80s, of Reagan in the US, Thatcher in the UK, and Helmut Kohl in Germany. And they absolutely refused to take a stand against apartheid South Africa, and to boycott, divest, and sanction South Africa. Even though they knew it was wrong, they knew it was an evil system, they knew it was wrong, but they did not want to take a stand against it. The word that was problematic at that time was the word communism. Mm. And so they actually said to themselves that these white people at the southern point of Africa are preserving Christianity in the southernmost part of Africa. That was the kind of talk.
Against communism,
Precisely.
atheism.
But then, of course, you had the problem of Beyers Naudé and Boesak and others, and Tutu, who are also Christians. And so they had to now eventually make a decision, what Christianity are we going to support? Fortunately for us, the Berlin Wall came down in '89, and so in a sense that threat disappeared. But as today, and I say this to many people, we were accused of being communist then, and that was a word that was used then. So any person who stood up against apartheid was simply called communist. Uh-huh. And so the same today, people who stand up against the injustice here against the Palestinian people are called anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand that these sort of word games are being played, and we have to, I think, mainly through our actions, through the actions for peace that we take. Those are the things that will convince people to become involved in the struggle for justice. So it's not simply about, it's not about words, it's about actions. Mm-hmm. And we know that actions always speak louder than words. Yes. And so as we take action, it can be anything small. I was detained by the apartheid security police. Fortunately, the church in Sweden knew that I was detained. And one Christmas, I was in prison on Christmas Day, and I'm saying this in Bethlehem, actually. I was detained on Christmas Day by a Christian government. I was held in prison on Christmas Day in 1985. Young children in Sweden heard about my detention, and they wrote little Christmas cards to my mother. Sorry, I don't want to get emotional when talking about this, but my mother received these Christmas cards, from young children in Sweden, and she was encouraged by this. And when I was released soon after Christmas, I saw these Christmas cards. So it's small little things like that. Christians in Sunday school in South Africa, Sunday school in the US, can write to a Sunday school in Bethlehem, and just to encourage them. That's the way we can do these kind of things. And then you have these other bigger things, like standing up against apartheid and so on, that we can also do. But I think both are important.
That's interesting. One of the difficult hurdles or problems I think peace movements and justice movements often have to contend with is bad actions within their own movement. For instance, there are Palestinians here who do commit terrorist acts.
Yeah.
And that then colors the whole
movement.
The whole movement and the whole argument, for justice. How did you deal with that in South Africa? Because I remember reading about different actions that were terroristic at that time.
Yes. Well, the first thing to say is that there's primary violence and there's secondary violence. And so we must never forget that the primary violence is the violence of apartheid. And so never take our focus away from that. Any action against that, we had this problem in South Africa where a child would throw a stone at a police vehicle. The child's action would be called violent but the police presence would not be called violent in the township. So we had to, through the Kairos document in particular, we had to expose those kind of lies actually, and actually call things out for what it is. So the apartheid system is violent. If someone takes a stone or whatever and takes an action against that, we must understand it's a reaction to a primary violence. Yeah. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is that someone like myself, I was actually approached by the underground to join the underground movement. I said no, and I did not condemn my fellow activists.
Those would have been more violent oriented?
Yes. It would be people who'd be trained in the underground, in arms and those kind of things. And I said no, but some of my friends said yes. I did not condemn them, and neither did they condemn me. But it's important, those of us who are the non-violent activists, that we actually do non-violent action. Sometimes people just talk non-violence. But non-violence is something that we must actively do. And so I think Bishop Tutu actually at one stage, he said we must engage in vigorous non-violence. He said it's these adjectives that are important. So let's not just talk about non-violence, let's talk about vigorous non-violence.
Yes.
Let's do that. And so that meant we had to step up our game. We had to be out on the streets marching. We had to make sure that certain things are not, we got to the point where we said, we will make South Africa ungovernable. And we made it ungovernable. It was impossible for them to govern South Africa after a while because the system was just so crazy, but we were just not prepared to take their laws very seriously. I would be detained, I would be given a form that I had to sign, say, you will only move in this municipal district. No, it made no sense to me. And I just said, well, they can go to hell. You have to say to something as evil as apartheid, go to hell, because that's where it belongs. We are busy building the kingdom. That's what we are. And so we were able to just ignore these laws most of the time and actually just live. So you could not, for example, have a white girlfriend, or you could not marry someone across the color line. Our people said, well, sorry, we're not going to take this very seriously. They had relationships across the color bars. They got married across the color lines. And we knew that apartheid would come to an end, actually.
So they just lived into sort of the end of it. I remember during the 80s, famous artists and athletes, beginning to boycott South Africa. Did that make a difference?
It made a huge difference, not a small difference, because these are the things that people care about. Sport is something that people care about deeply. And in South Africa, we had the advantage of something like rugby. Rugby was a religion for the white Afrikaner people. And so we would call on sports bodies, rugby bodies across the globe, do not play with apartheid rugby teams. But of course, they would still find ways to justify why this must go ahead. And then we knew, well, the only way to do this is to make sure that this happens from the bottom up, from the people. And so the rugby team would travel to New Zealand to go play a rugby match there. And then as the teams ran onto the field, the spectators would all run onto the field as well.
Oh, God.
And they would just disrupt the game. The match could not go ahead. And it was actions like those that actually brought the system to an end. Because everywhere, I saw, because I traveled a bit, I saw how white South Africans were treated as pariah. They were, wherever they were not welcomed by people, but they had money and they could travel. But they were not treated well. And I think they just said to themselves, this can't go on. The system, in fact, it could not go on. And they had to get to the point where they said, let's negotiate, and let's build some sort of life together. And we were blessed with the leadership of someone like Nelson Mandela, who believed that people should all be brought together. We certainly did not opt for any kind of two-state solution or anything like that. We wanted one united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. And that became our constitution. You know, it was written into our constitution. And today, with all the flaws and the foibles, all the challenges, we continue to build this kind of South Africa. And I think we are quite determined. I mean,
Yes.
it's a daily struggle.
Yes.
We have to make this non-racial South Africa a daily reality. Because there will always be forces fighting against it and trying to say to us, oh, well, you see, you were wrong, and so on. But actually, we know that that's the only way in which we can live together.
Thank you. And in the introduction, I mentioned that you're going to be part of the South African Palestine Anti-Apartheid Committee. Let's bring this discussion home a little bit here. What are similarities between the context of Israel-Palestine today and what you saw or what you lived through in South Africa?
Let's first talk about the differences, because I think before we get to the similarities, the differences are that just in terms of sheer numbers, you know, it's a 90% black country. And so there's no way that you could have 10% controlling 90%. That's not on. So in this country, I know there's the numbers are a little bit more equal. But in our case, there was an overwhelming difference in terms of the numbers. In terms of the similarities, these similarities have been there for a while now. It's nothing new. Bishop Tutu, when he visited here, he actually said, you know, I can replace what I see happening there with what is happening here. It's very similar to apartheid, actually. And he was right, of course. But he was criticized for that. But I mean, Jimmy Carter said the same thing, you
Yes.
know.
In his book, Peace or Apartheid.
Precisely. So there are some people who actually see it for what it is, many years before other people can see it.
Yes.
I'm involved with the people here, the Christians in particular in Palestine, since 2009, when we launched the Kairos Palestine document here in Bethlehem. And in 2011, we had something called the Russell Tribunal on Palestine in Cape Town. And the focus there was on the question of apartheid. This is 2011. We are now in 2023, 12 years later. It was only recently that Amnesty International, B'Tselem, and all these bodies, in a sense, began to agree with us. And they began to work on, well, they work on the UN definition of apartheid, actually. And of course, we must be careful. This is not a simply, you know, legal minds against each other. We must be careful, because then it disempowers the activists on the ground. It disempowers the people, and it's as if the legal thing is going to sort of resolve it. That's one arm of it. But ultimately, it is about people living together. How are the people in this region going to live together in peace, have a relationship with one another as human beings, even beyond the fact that you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're Muslim or you are secular or whatever? I mean, I think we must talk about people's humanity, you know. And that's the thing about South Africa. We actually always said, our struggle are not against white people. Our struggle is against a system. And we use the word the system. Actually, we used it in meetings. We said, the system is going to do this. The system is going to do that. And it's the same thing here. There's a system in operation that justifies some kind of superiority of a group of people, you know. And they are actually intellectually dishonest. But they try to justify this intellectually, you know, over many years. But if you get down to the root of it, you have to say, but people are equal. Every single human being has been created in the image of God. There's no human being on this earth that has not been created in the image of God. So every Palestinian has been created in the image of God. So why can you not see that? And the more you get to the point where you recognize that, every Israeli, every Jewish person has been created in the image of God. We have to say this. And if you begin to see this, and people begin to look each other in the eye and begin to build relationships, they will find out that they are simply human. You know, their blood is red. They laugh at the same things. They love certain foods. They love certain wines. You will discover that we have much more in common than the things that separate us. Sure, we have cultural differences, we have language differences, but even those differences can enrich. You know, I come from a country that has 11, now 12 official languages. We play music, we sing, we play the drum. You know, in our youth program, we actually make those drums nowadays.
Oh.
And we get people to drum together because, and we can get people to drum together here as well.
Do you have any words of hope you could share with both Palestinian and Israeli peoples that are seeking a just conclusion to this difficult situation here?
Yes. Yes. Truth always wins. Love always wins. Justice always wins. Peace always wins. If we want to force those words into a timeline or something, well, we can forget about that. There's something bigger at work in the universe, and whether anyone likes it or not, justice will always win. Peace will always win. Love will always win. That's the basic truth. And the sooner we make that basic truth a part of ourselves, the better.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend Arrison, for these few minutes. And we're just so glad you're here in Bethlehem bringing this message. It's a message of hope for us here. And we hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Hope you'll be back soon.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you. And we want to thank you all for joining us for Global Peacemakers Speak again. And we look forward to being with you again shortly.